They say the internet never forgets, but they forget to mention it never forgives. When Julian slammed our apartment door, leaving me with unpaid bills to chase the sterling heiress, he thought he had entered high society. He never expected his mistress's arrogance, a boastful photo, and 3 scornful comments would burn down their empire. She thought she ruled social media until she realized the send button is sometimes more dangerous than a loaded gun. My name is Beatrice Halston, and right now, I am standing in the center of a living room that echoes with the silence of abandonment. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago is burying itself under a heavy blanket of January snow. The city looks beautiful in a cruel, indifferent way, a monochromatic landscape of white and gray that matches the desolation inside my chest. In my hand, the paper feels heavy, though it is just standard legal stock. The divorce petition, dissolution of marriage. The words look sterile, clinical, stripping away the blood and tears and years of life that actually go into ending a marriage. I run my thumb over the sharp edge of the paper, half expecting it to cut me, but the pain is far deeper than anything physical. I need to go back. I need to understand how I got here. Standing in an empty apartment with a piece of paper that says I am obsolete, it feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only 7 years. I remember the exact moment our trajectories crossed. I was 22 years old, a scholarship student at the University of Chicago, top of my class in data analytics. I had the world at my feet. My professors told me I had a brilliant mind, one capable of seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. I had a full scholarship offer for a PhD program waiting on my desk, a path that promised stability, respect, and a quiet life of intellectual fulfillment. And then there was Julian Thorne. He was not the slick, polished executive he is today. He was a boy from a Rust Belt town in Ohio, wearing a suit that was a size too big for his frame and carrying a hunger in his eyes that I mistook for passion. We met in the library during finals week. He was struggling with a complex statistical model for his MBA thesis, his hair messy, his eyes red from lack of sleep. I saw him staring at the screen with desperation, the look of someone watching their dreams slip through their fingers. I walked over and offered to help. He looked up at me, and that was it. He had a smile that could melt the winter frost, shy and grateful and incredibly warm. He bought me a coffee with the last $5 in his wallet. We sat there for hours, not talking about data, but about life. He told me about his father who worked in a factory until his back gave out, about his mother who cleaned houses so he could go to college. He told me he was going to be the one to change everything for his family. He wanted to be a man of substance. I fell in love with his ambition. I fell in love with the potential I saw in him, the diamond in the rough that just needed a little pressure and polish to shine. That was when the sacrifice began. Though I never called it that at the time, I called it love. Julian confessed to me 3 months later that he was drowning in debt. He could not afford the tuition for his final year. He was going to have to drop out, go back to Ohio, and manage a retail store. The despair in his voice broke my heart. I looked at him, at the brilliance I knew he possessed, and I made a choice. I declined the PhD offer. I remember the disappointment in my advisor's eyes, but I did not care. I took a corporate job as a junior data analyst at a mid-level firm. It was grueling, mind-numbing work, crunching numbers for 12 hours a day. But it paid a salary, and that salary went to Julian. I paid his tuition. I paid our rent for a tiny, drafty studio apartment where the heating rattled and the shower never stayed hot for more than 2 minutes. I paid for his textbooks, his exam fees, and the certification courses he needed to bolster his resume. I worked 60 hours a week so he could study. I learned to cook cheap meals, pasta, rice, beans, stretching every dollar until it screamed so that he could buy the networking lunches he said were essential for his future. I was the soil, and he was the seed. I did not mind being the dirt if it meant he could grow. The Julian of those days was different. He was acutely aware of what I was doing. I remember coming home late one rainy Tuesday, exhausted to my bones, my shoes soaked through because I could not justify buying new ones. Julian was waiting for me. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my wet hair. "Beatrice," he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are saving my life, I swear to you. When I make it, it is all yours. Every cent. We are going to buy that house by the lake, the one with the wraparound porch and the big oak tree. You will never have to work a day in your life. My success is your success." I believed him. God help me. I believed him with every fiber of my being. I thought we were building a partnership, a fortress that no one could breach. But then came the offer from Sterling Vance Enterprises. It was the golden ticket, a junior executive position at one of the most prestigious financial firms in the country. The starting salary was more than my parents made in 5 years combined. We celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne on the roof of our building. Looking out at the city lights, Julian held me close, pointing at the tallest skyscrapers. "I am going to own this town." "Be," he said, "and you will be right there beside me." But the moment he walked into that glass tower, something shifted. It was not immediate. It was a slow, subtle erosion, like water wearing down stone. First, it was the hours. He worked late, always. Then came the weekends. Then came the change in his demeanor. The shy, grateful boy from Ohio began to vanish, replaced by a man who checked his reflection in every window he passed. He started talking about optics and networking and personal branding. He stopped asking about my day, my work, which he once found fascinating, was now dismissed as boring back-office stuff. When I tried to talk about a project I was leading, his eyes would glaze over, and he would interrupt to check his emails. Then came the exclusions. Sterling Vance was known for its lavish company parties, events where the elite of Chicago gathered to drink vintage wine and broker power. I was excited for the first one. I bought a new dress, a simple navy blue sheath that I thought was elegant. Julian looked at me as I walked out of the bedroom, and his expression was not one of admiration. It was a wince. "You do not need to come to the gala tonight." "Be," he said, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror. "It is just boring shop talk. You would be miserable." I insisted, saying I wanted to meet his colleagues. He sighed, a sound of profound irritation. "Look at you. Beatrice," he said, his voice cold. "You are wearing a dress from a department store. These people wear Armani and Chanel. I am trying to build a brand here. You just do not fit the aesthetic. You are too domestic." That was the first crack in the glass. He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of the woman who had paid for the very suit he was wearing. He was ashamed of the hands that had scrubbed dishes so he could study. I stayed home that night, crying into my pillow, while he went out to charm the world. It only got worse, and then a name started appearing in his stories. Elara. At first, it was casual. "Elara thinks we should pivot the strategy. Elara has a great eye for design. Elara knows everyone in the city." Elara Vance, the daughter of the CEO, the heiress to the Sterling Vance empire. I looked her up. Of course. Who would not? She was everything I was not. She was 25, blonde, impeccably styled, and radiated the kind of effortless confidence that only comes from having never heard the word no in your entire life. She was the director of marketing, but she was more than that. She was an influencer. 2 million followers on Instagram. She posted photos of her vacations in the Maldives, her front row seats at Fashion Week, her dinners at restaurants where a salad cost $50. Julian started quoting her with a reverence he used to reserve for me. He started dressing differently, wearing brighter colors, bolder cuts, mimicking the style of the men in her social circle. He started going to the gym at 5 in the morning, obsessing over his physique. I tried to talk to him. I tried to bridge the widening chasm between us. I cooked his favorite meals, but he would come home late, claiming he had already eaten at a client dinner. I tried to plan date nights, but he was always too busy, too tired, or too stressed. But I knew, deep down, in the place where intuition lives, I knew. The realization did not hit me with a bang, but with a scent. It was last week. Julian came home at 2 in the morning. He claimed he had been closing a deal with the partners from Tokyo, that the negotiations had run long. He looked wired, energetic, his eyes bright with an adrenaline that had nothing to do with work. He leaned in to kiss me on the cheek, a cold, perfunctory peck that felt more like a dismissal than a greeting, and that was when I smelled it. It was not the stale smell of office coffee or the dry air of a conference room. It was not his cologne. It was jasmine and expensive vanilla, a rich, cloying, unmistakable scent. I froze. My mind flashed back to an Instagram story I had seen on Alara Vance's profile just 2 days prior. She had posted a picture of a crystal bottle, bragging about her custom-blended perfume, sourced from a perfumery in Paris, costing $500 an ounce. She called it her signature. The scent clinging to my husband's collar was identical. He pulled away, checking his phone, smiling at a notification that lit up the screen. He did not even notice that I had stopped breathing. He hummed a happy tune as he walked into the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just brought the ghost of another woman into our home. I stood there in the hallway, the paralyzing cold spreading from my chest to my fingertips. That scent was not an accident. It was not a brush in a crowded elevator. It was a territory marker. It was a statement. I looked at his back, at the expensive suit jacket I had ironed for him that morning, and I realized with a sickening clarity that the Julian who had cried in my arms on that mattress 7 years ago was dead. The man in the kitchen was a stranger, and I, Beatrice Halston, the woman who had given up her dreams to build his foundation, was no longer his partner. I was just an obstacle waiting to be removed, and now, standing here with the divorce papers in my hand, staring at the gray Chicago sky. I know I was right. The scent was just the prologue. This paper is the first chapter of the end. But what Julian and Alara do not understand is that I am not just a data analyst. I am a woman who knows how to find patterns in the chaos. And while they think I am broken, they have forgotten one crucial thing about me. I remember everything. The candles had long since drowned in their own wax, leaving hardened, misshapen puddles on the tablecloth I had ironed 3 times. The dinner I had spent the entire afternoon preparing a rosemary roasted chicken. The exact meal we had shared on the night he passed his MBA entrance exam sat in the center of the table, cold and congealed. The clock on the wall ticked with a rhythmic, mocking precision, marking the passage of time in a room that felt like it was holding its breath. It was midnight. He was 4 hours late. I had texted him at 8, then at 9, then at 10. No response. Just the silence of a phone that refused to light up. I sat there in the dim light, wearing the pearl earrings he had given me for our 2nd anniversary, the ones I knew he had bought with money he saved by skipping lunch for a month back when we had nothing. I touched the cold curve of the pearl, trying to summon the memory of that boy, the one who would apologize if he was 10 minutes late because he could not bear to make me worry. Then came the sound, the distinct, metallic slide of a key in the lock. It was not a hurried fumble of someone rushing home with apologies spilling from their lips. It was slow, deliberate. The heavy click of the deadbolt retracting sounded like a judge's gavel hitting the sound block. The door opened, and Julian walked in. He did not look at me. He did not look at the cold dinner or the dead candles. He closed the door behind him with a quiet finality and placed his briefcase on the floor. He looked immaculate. His suit was crisp, his hair perfectly styled, and his face was a mask of terrifying calm. There was no guilt in his eyes. There was no panic. There was only the detached, clinical coldness of a man who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror a dozen times before stepping into the room. "You are late," I said. My voice sounded small, brittle, like dry leaves stepping on pavement. "I made this dinner to celebrate." Julian turned to me then. His gaze swept over the table, over the food that had gone to waste, and finally landed on me. He looked at me not with anger, but with a profound, exhausting boredom. "I am not hungry." "Beatrice," he said. He walked past me into the bedroom. I followed him, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Something was wrong. The air in the apartment had shifted, growing heavy and suffocating. "Julian," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "You were promoted today. This was supposed to be our night. Where were you?" He stood by the closet, stripping off his tie. He did not toss it onto the chair like he usually did. He rolled it carefully and placed it in his suitcase, the large, leather travel bag that he kept on the top shelf. He pulled the bag down. "I was with people who understand what this promotion actually means," he said, his back to me. I stopped in the doorway. "People who understand, what is that supposed to mean? I understand. Julian, I have been with you every step of the way. I proofread your applications. I quizzed you for your license exams." He stopped packing and turned around slowly. The look on his face stopped the words in my throat. It was a look of pity. Cruel, arrogant pity. That is exactly the problem. "Beatrice," he said, "you have been there every step of the way. But you are looking at the ground, watching your feet to make sure you do not trip. I am looking at the skyline. We are not looking at the same things anymore. We are not even in the same world." I took a step back, as if he had slapped me. "What are you saying?" he sighed. A sharp, impatient sound. "I am saying that I cannot do this anymore. I cannot come home to this cramped apartment and pretend that this small, safe life is enough for me. I cannot come home to you and pretend that we are equals." The cruelty of it took my breath away. "Equals." Julian laughed. A dry, humorless bark. "Look at you. Beatrice, look at this place. You clip coupons to save 50 cents on detergent. You mend socks instead of buying new ones. You are obsessed with safety, with survival. You live your life in a defensive crouch. I saved because we had to. I cried out, the shock turning into a flare of defensive anger. I saved so you could spend. I clipped coupons so you could buy those Italian suits, and that is why you will never understand." He cut in, his voice rising just enough to silence me. "You see money as something to hoard. People like Alara see it as a tool, a weapon. She understands leverage. She understands that you have to project power to get power. You project fear. You project mediocrity." Alara. The name hung in the air between us, sharp and jagged. He had said it. He had brought her into the room, not just as a colleague, but as the standard against which I was being measured and found wanting. "So that is what this is," I whispered. "You are leaving me for Alara Vance." Julian did not deny it. He did not even flinch. He turned back to the closet and started pulling his shirts off the hangers, only the new ones, the silk blends and the Egyptian cottons. "Alara and I have a vision," he said, his tone matter of fact, as if discussing a business merger. "She can open doors for me that you do not even know exist. Her father respects her. With her by my side, I am not just an employee. I am a partner. I am family. She is offering me the director's seat within 6 months." He paused. Holding a cashmere sweater I had bought him for Christmas, it had cost me 2 weeks of overtime pay. He looked at it for a second, then tossed it into the bag. "And you? Beatrice, you are a hindrance. You are an anchor dragging along the bottom, slowing me down. I cannot walk into the boardroom with a wife who looks like she buys her clothes at a discount outlet. It ruins the narrative." I felt my knees give way, and I sank onto the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under my weight. This man, this stranger with Julian's face and Julian's voice, was dissecting our marriage like a failed quarterly report. He was calculating the return on investment of our love and deciding to cut his losses. I sat there, paralyzed, watching him pack. He moved with efficient speed. He took the watch box. He took the leather loafers. He took the expensive cologne. He left the photo album from our trip to Lake Michigan. He left the handmade scarf I had knitted him during his first winter in Chicago. He was filtering his life, taking only the things that signaled wealth and leaving behind everything that signaled love. I stared at his back, my mind racing through the last 7 years, the late nights, the instant noodles, the weekends spent entering data into spreadsheets to pay his tuition bills, the times I held him while he cried from stress, the promises. "Julian," I said, My voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the room, it sounded loud. He stopped, his hand on the zipper of the bag. 7 years. I said, 7 years of my life. I gave you everything. I gave up my PhD. I gave up my youth. I built you from nothing. What was it for? What was the last 7 years to you? He turned slowly. He looked me in the eye. And for a second, I saw a flash of the old Julian. But it was gone instantly, crushed under the weight of his ambition. He adjusted his cufflinks, straightening his posture. It was a stepping stone. Beatrice, he said. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A stepping stone, not a partner, not a wife, not a lover, just a rock in the mud that he had stepped on to keep his shoes clean while he crossed the river. A necessary stepping stone, he added, as if that somehow made it better. I appreciate the support. I really do. But you have served your purpose. I have outgrown this life. I have outgrown you. He zipped the bag shut. The sound was like a zipper closing on a body bag. He picked up the suitcase and walked out of the bedroom. I followed him, dragging my feet, feeling like I was moving through water. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. I stood in the doorway, shivering as the cold draft from the corridor hit me. He did not look back. He did not say goodbye. He simply walked toward the elevator, his steps echoing on the tile. I stumbled to the window in the living room, the one overlooking the street. I needed to see. I needed to witness the final act of this tragedy. Down below, under the orange glow of the streetlights. The snow was falling softly, parked directly in front of our building, standing out against the gray slush and the white snow like a fresh wound, was a car, a bright red sports car, low, sleek, and aggressive. The driver's side door opened, but no one got out. I saw a hand wave a woman's hand, manicured, holding a cigarette. Julian walked out of the building. He tossed his bag into the trunk. He walked to the passenger side. He paused for a second, looking up at our apartment window. I knew he could not see me in the dark, but I felt his gaze. It was not a look of regret. It was a look of liberation. He was shedding his skin. He got into the car. The door slammed shut. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that shook the silence of the night. The red car peeled away from the curb, tires spinning on the wet pavement, leaving behind nothing but exhaust smoke and the red blur of taillights disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a long time, my hand pressed against the cold glass. The reflection staring back at me was a ghost. I had not just lost a husband. A husband is someone you can divorce. A husband is someone you can mourn. I had lost the past. I had lost the narrative of my own life. Every memory of the last 7 years, every sacrifice, every kind word, every shared dream had been rewritten in a single instant. They were not acts of love. They were transactions. I was an investor who had been defrauded. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. These hands had worked double shifts. These hands had cooked his meals. These hands had smoothed his hair when he was afraid of failing. He had taken my time. He had taken my youth. He had taken the best parts of me, used them to build a ladder, climbed to the top, and then kicked the ladder away. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor. The apartment was silent. The only sound was the wind howling outside, rattling the window pane. I did not cry. I could not cry. The pain was too large for tears. It was a vast, hollow emptiness where my heart used to be. I was 29 years old. I was alone, and for the first time in my life, I realized that being a good person, being a loyal partner, being a loving wife, none of it mattered. Not to men like Julian, not to women like Alara. To them, I was just debris in the wake of their ambition. But as I sat there on the cold floor, watching the snow fall, a single, cold thought crystallized in the center of my mind. He called me a stepping stone. He forgot that stones are hard. He forgot that stones can break glass. And he forgot that if you trip over the stone you used to cross the river, you will drown just as surely as anyone else, for 48 hours. The apartment existed in a state of suspended animation. I moved through the rooms like a ghost haunting her own life, stepping over the empty spaces where Julian's shoes used to sit, avoiding the side of the closet that now gaped open, bare and accusatory. I did not eat. I did not sleep. I just existed in a grave, ecstatic hum of shock. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant, muffled sounds of traffic from the street below. And then, the world broke in. It started with a single vibration on the coffee table, then another. Then a continuous, angry buzzing that sounded like a swarm of hornets trapped against glass. My phone, which I had ignored since Julian walked out, was lighting up with a ferocity that made my stomach turn. I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly. I expected texts from Julian, perhaps an apology, perhaps a logistical demand about picking up the rest of his things. But the names flashing on the screen were not his. They were friends, acquaintances, former coworkers, people I had not spoken to in months. Did you see this? Oh my God. B, I am so sorry. Please tell me this is a joke. Do not look at Instagram. The warning, of course, had the opposite effect. Human nature is a cruel thing. We are programmed to look at the car crash, to stare at the fire that burns us. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I took a breath that rattled in my chest, and I pressed it. The algorithm did not even make me search. It was right there at the top of my feed, reposted and liked by mutual acquaintances who were undoubtedly dissecting my misery in their group chats at this very moment. It was a photo of them. They were standing on a balcony, not just any balcony, but the terrace of the penthouse suite at the Langham, overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights blurred into a bouquet of gold and sapphire behind them, framing them like royalty. Julian was wearing a tuxedo, looking sharper and more handsome than I had ever seen him. But his eyes were not looking at the camera. They were fixed on her. He looked at her with a mix of adoration and hunger, the same look he had given me in the library 7 years ago, repurposed now for a higher tax bracket. And Alara. She was the center of gravity in the image. She wore a silver slip dress that looked like liquid mercury, holding a crystal flute of champagne with a casual arrogance. She was looking directly at the lens, her head tilted back slightly, her smile predatory and triumphant. But it was the caption that stopped my heart. Finally free from the heavy burden of the past, so I can fly with the one who truly deserves me. True love is not for the mediocre or the heavy-hearted. It is for those who dare to ascend. Here is to new beginnings and shedding dead weight. Upgrade soulmate power couple Sterling Vance legacy. Dead weight. The air left my lungs. I sat on the couch, staring at the screen until the pixels burned into my retinas. She had not named me. She did not have to. To the hundreds of people in our overlapping circles, the burden and the dead weight were clearly identified. I was the heavy past. I was the mediocrity she was sneering at. I scrolled down. The comments were a cesspool of sycophancy. Yas, queen, you look stunning. Finally, you two look perfect together. Upgrade of the century. Drop the skincare routine. Goddess. And there was Julian, my husband of 3 days ago, liking every comment that praised her and insulted his past. Something inside me snapped. It was not a break. It was a shift. The sorrow that had been paralyzing me for 2 days suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It was the clarity of a data analyst finding the outlier in the set. It was the clarity of a woman who realizes she has nothing left to lose. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the quiet, mousy girl who clipped coupons and supported her husband from the shadows. They thought I would curl up and die of shame. My fingers moved across the keyboard before I could talk myself out of it. I did not scream. I did not use all caps. I did not curse. I simply typed the truth. Congratulations to you both. It is a lovely photo. I genuinely hope this upgrade includes a payment plan for the $80,000 in student loans and credit card debt I paid off for Julian over the last 5 years, so he could afford to be in that room with you. I hit send. I put the phone down, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited. It took less than 3 minutes. My notification screen exploded. Beatrice. Halston just dropped the mic. Wait, he was broke. Receipts. We need receipts. Oof, that burns. I picked the phone back up. I expected Alara to delete the comment. That is what a smart PR professional would do. Ignore the troll, control the narrative, delete the negativity. But Alara Vance was not just a PR professional. She was a narcissist who had never been told no. She was a woman who believed her own hype so completely that she thought she was untouchable. She did not delete my comment. She pinned it. She pinned it to the top of the post, highlighting it for her 2 million followers to see, turning me into a specimen to be mocked. And then, she replied, Beatrice, Halston. Oh, honey, you sound so bitter. It is not cute. We do not talk about pennies and pocket change in this tax bracket. Julian needed a partner with vision, not a banker, but do not worry. Once the Meridian merger goes public next Tuesday, we will buy you a nice little consolation prize, maybe a cat. You seem like the type. Stay mad, we move. I stared at the screen. I blinked. I read it again. The Meridian merger. My breath caught in my throat. I was a data analyst. I worked in the corporate sector. I knew how these things worked. Mergers and acquisitions of that scale, especially involving a giant like Sterling Vance, were fiercely guarded secrets. The quiet period before a public announcement was sacred. To leak information about a merger before the official press release, especially one that would impact stock prices, was not just a slip of the tongue, it was illegal. It was a violation of SEC regulations. It was insider trading fodder. It was gun jumping, and she had just tweeted it to 2 million people to win an argument with her boyfriend's ex-wife. But she was not done. The adrenaline of the fight, the dopamine hit of her followers cheering her on, had intoxicated her. She began replying to other comments, doubling down, digging the hole deeper with every tap of her manicured fingernails. A user named FinanceBro99 commented, Wait, is the Meridian deal actually happening? Rumors said it was dead. Alara replied instantly, Run, do not walk, to buy stock. Sweetie, we signed the papers in secret last night at the penthouse. That is why we are celebrating. The official news drops in 3 days, but we are already popping bottles. The price is going to triple. You heard it here first. My hands started to shake, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of her stupidity. She was confirming a signed deal. She was advising people to buy stock based on non-public information. She was essentially handing the Securities and Exchange Commission a signed confession on a silver platter. And then came the personal attacks. She could not just leave it at business. She had to make it personal. She had to prove that she was superior to me in blood and bone. A user named Kind Soul wrote, That is kind of mean. Alara? She did help him when he was down. Alara's reply was visceral in its cruelty. Help, please. She was a crutch. Julian comes from talent, but he was held back by people who think small. People from the trailer park mentality can never understand how the elite operate. We do not owe the help an explanation when we let them go. She should go back to whatever discount bin he found her in. I read the words trailer park mentality and discount bin and felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. She was not just attacking me, she was attacking everyone who had ever had to work for a living. Everyone who started from nothing. She was exposing the ugly, rotting classism that lay beneath her polished influencer veneer. I took a screenshot, then another. I captured everything. The original post, the pinned comment, the mention of the Meridian merger, the confirmation of the signing date, the advice to buy stock, the slurs against my background. I worked quickly, my fingers flying across the screen with the precision of a surgeon. I knew how the internet worked. I knew that at any moment, a lawyer from Sterling Vance, someone with actual brains would wake up, see this train wreck, and scream at her to delete everything. I saved the images to my phone, then uploaded them to a secure cloud drive. Then I saved them to an external hard drive connected to my laptop. I created 3 redundancies in under 5 minutes. As I worked, The comments section turned into a war zone. The Meridian slip was starting to get noticed by finance Twitter accounts. The trailer park comment was starting to get quoted by people who were not amused by her elitism. But Alara was still in the comments, fighting, laughing, using cry-laughing emojis as she burned her father's legacy to the ground. Alara Vance. Haters are just mad they are not us. Julian is finally with someone who matches his pedigree. We are untouchable. I looked at that word, untouchable. Nobody is untouchable. That is the first rule of data. Every system has a flaw. Every code has a bug. Every person has a breaking point. Alara Vance had just handed me the weapon I needed. She thought she was humiliating me. She thought she was burying me under the weight of her social capital. But in her arrogance, she had forgotten the one thing that I knew better than anyone. Data is permanent. I did not reply again. I did not engage. I let her have the last word. I let her think she had won the battle. I watched as the likes on her post climbed to 50,000, then 60,000. I watched as Julian's new life was celebrated by the masses. But as I sat there in my cold, empty apartment, looking at the screenshots that proved federal crimes and moral bankruptcy, I felt the first stirrings of something that was not grief. It was strategy. I closed my laptop. The room was dark now, the only light coming from the street lamps outside reflecting off the snow. I was alone. I was broke. I was humiliated. But I held a grenade in my hand, and Alara Vance had just pulled the pin for me. She wanted to talk about an upgrade fine. I would show her what happens when you upgrade from a wife who protects you to a mistress who exposes you. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. The tears were gone. The internet never forgets, I whispered to the empty room, and neither do I. The silence that followed the digital storm was heavier than the one that had preceded it. Sometime around 3 a.m, the post vanished. 1 minute it was there, a monument to Alara Vance's narcissism and indiscretion. And the next, the screen refreshed to display a generic error message saying the content was no longer available. The pinned comment, the thread of insults, the admission of federal crimes, all of it was scrubbed clean. It was a testament to the power of the Sterling Vance legal team. They had likely woken up, seen the disaster unfolding, and scorched the earth. To the rest of the world, it was as if the exchange had never happened. But I sat there in the dark, the blue light of my laptop reflecting in my tired eyes, looking at the folder on my desktop labeled simply evidence. They could scrub the servers, but they could not scrub my hard drive. I had it all. I expected silence to follow, the kind where everyone retreats to their corners to lick their wounds. I was wrong. At 7 a.m, my phone rang. It was Julian. I stared at his name on the screen. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but a morbid curiosity stopped me. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to know if there was any shred of the man I loved left inside the corporate shell. I answered without saying a word. Beatrice. His voice was low, tight with a suppressed rage that vibrated through the speaker. It was not the voice of a man who was sorry. It was the voice of a man who was afraid and was converting that fear into aggression. Do not say a word. Julian, I said, my voice hoarse from lack of use. You listen to me, he hissed. I know you saw the post. I know you probably took screenshots because you are petty like that. But let me make something very clear to you. If any of that sees the light of day, if you try to use it to blackmail us or go to the press, I will ruin you. I held the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. You will ruin me, Julian. You already walked out on me. You left me with nothing. What is left to ruin? Do not test me, he snapped. The Vance family has reach in this city that you cannot even comprehend. If you try to sabotage my career because you are jealous, I will make sure you never work in this town again. I will bury you in legal fees until you are living on the street. Do you understand? Alara was just venting. She made a mistake, but if you try to capitalize on it, you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life. Delete the photos. Beatrice, move on. The line went dead. He did not call to apologize for his mistress' humiliation of me. He called to threaten me into silence. He was protecting the merger. He was protecting his golden ticket. I put the phone down on the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, dawning realization of just how small I was in their world. He was right. I was one woman in a rented apartment. They were a dynasty. If I fought them now, directly, I would be crushed like an insect. The blow he promised came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, on a gray Tuesday morning, I was called into the office of the small analytics firm where I had worked for the past 3 years. It was a modest job, one I had taken because it offered flexible hours that allowed me to support Julian's schedule. But I was good at it. I was reliable. My manager, a kind man named David, who had always praised my attention to detail, would not look me in the eye. He shuffled papers on his desk, his face pale. "I am so sorry." "Beatrice," he said, his voice quiet, "we are going through some restructuring. The directive came down from the owners this morning. We have to cut costs immediately." I sat there, my hands folded in my lap. I looked at David, really looked at him. Restructuring David. "We just landed 3 new clients last week. We are understaffed, not overstaffed." He winced. He looked at the door, then leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Beatrice, please, do not make me say it. The owners, they have investors who are very close to the Sterling family. I was told to let you go, today, effective immediately." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was not a threat. It was an execution. Julian had not waited for me to leak the photos. He had struck first. A preemptive strike to show me exactly how helpless I was. I packed my box in silence. I did not say goodbye to my colleagues. I walked out of the building into the biting Chicago wind. Holding a cardboard box that contained a stapler, a mug, and a picture frame I had already turned face down. The weeks that followed were a blur of humiliation and scarcity. I had $700 in my savings account. The rent was due in 10 days. The student loans, the ones I had prioritized over my own savings, were demanding their monthly tithe. I applied for unemployment, but the paperwork would take weeks. I applied for other jobs, dozens of them, but the silence was deafening. I began to wonder if Julian had blacklisted me not just at my old firm, but across the entire industry. I started selling things. First, it was the designer handbags Julian had bought me during his guilt phases, the ones he insisted I wear to look the part. Even though I hated them, they went to a consignment shop for a fraction of their value. Then, the electronics, the iPad I used for reading, the spare monitor. But it was not enough. On a Tuesday afternoon, with the eviction notice threatening to manifest in my mailbox, I found myself standing at the counter of a pawn shop on State Street. The lighting was harsh, fluorescent and buzzing. The man behind the glass looked bored. I placed the velvet box on the counter. Inside was the diamond necklace my grandmother had left me. It was the only heirloom I owned, the only thing of true value that belonged solely to me, unconnected to Julian. I had planned to wear it when I defended my PhD dissertation. In that other life I had abandoned. $400, the man said, barely glancing at it. "It is worth at least $2,000, I whispered, my throat tight. "The setting is vintage platinum." "400, he repeated. "Take it or leave it." I took it. I walked out of the shop with $400 in cash and a hole in my soul. I bought groceries, rice, beans, frozen vegetables. I paid the electricity bill. I sat in my apartment, wrapped in a blanket because I kept the heat set to 60 degrees to save money. And I ate plain rice from a bowl. I was at rock bottom. I was the woman Alara Vance had described pathetic, struggling, a discard. But despair, I discovered, has a limit. There is a floor to the abyss. And once you hit that floor, you have 2 choices. You can lie there and rot, or you can stand up and look at the structure of the fall. I chose to look. I pulled my laptop onto my lap. I opened the folder, evidence. I stopped looking at the screenshots as a heartbroken wife. I stopped looking at the insults. I stopped caring that she called me a crutch. I put on my analyst glasses. I looked at the data points. Image 1, Alara Vance and Julian Thorne at the Langham. Timestamp, January 20th, 10:45 p.m. Statement: we signed the papers in secret last night. Fact: the Meridian merger was not public knowledge. Violation disclosure of material non-public information. Image 2. Reply to user finance. Bro99. Statement: run, do not walk, to buy stock. The price is going to triple. Violation. This was the smoking gun. This was not just a leak. This was financial advice based on insider information. This was a direct violation of the Securities Exchange Act. I cross-referenced the dates. I pulled up the trading charts for Sterling Vance and Meridian. In the days following her post before the official announcement, there was a spike in trading volume. A significant spike. Someone had acted on the rumors. Maybe it was the people who saw her post before she deleted it. Maybe it was her friends. If the SEC saw this, it would not just be a fine, it would be an investigation. It would be criminal charges. It would delay the IPO. It would cost the company millions, perhaps billions, in valuation drops and legal fees. I held the power to destroy them. I could send this to the press right now. I could send it to the SEC. I could watch them burn tomorrow. But as I sat there, shivering in the cold, I realized that tomorrow was too soon. If I struck now, I was just a disgruntled ex-wife lashing out. Julian would spin it. He would say the screenshots were doctored. He would say I was crazy. He had the money and the lawyers to crush me before the truth ever took root. I was unemployed, broke, and credible only to those who knew me. To defeat a giant, you do not throw a stone at their shin. You wait until they are standing on the edge of a cliff, and then you remove the ground beneath their feet. I needed to be unassailable. I needed to be someone they could not dismiss as a bitter ex. I needed resources. I needed a reputation. I closed the laptop. The decision settled over me like a calm, cold blanket. I was going to disappear. I picked up my phone. I opened my social media apps. Facebook delete, Instagram delete, LinkedIn deactivate. I went through my contact list and deleted every number associated with Julian. Every mutual friend who had stayed silent. Every connection to the life I was leaving behind. I contacted the landlord. I told him I was moving out at the end of the month. I would find somewhere cheaper, somewhere obscure, somewhere they would never think to look. I would take the time I needed. I would rebuild my career from the ground up, brick by brick, using the very skills they mocked. I would become an expert in the exact thing that was going to destroy them, the intersection of data and reputation. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were blurring in the distance. Somewhere out there, in a warm penthouse, Julian and Alara were likely clinking glasses. Thinking they had won. They thought they had silenced me with fear and poverty. They thought I was gone. Let them think that. Let them build their castle higher and higher. Let them stack their lies on top of their arrogance until the structure is dizzying. I turned away from the window and began to pack the last of my books. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. There was only work to be done. The best revenge is not to scream, I told myself, the words echoing in the empty room. The best revenge is to prepare for their ruin in silence. My new kingdom was 300 square feet of peeling beige paint and the relentless rattle of the elevated train tracks just outside my window. The apartment was located in a neighborhood on the far south side of the city, a place where sirens were a nightly lullaby, and the nearest grocery store was a 2-mile bus ride away. It was a far cry from the lakeside views Julian and I had once dreamed of, and an even further cry from the penthouse where he now resided. But as I unpacked my single suitcase and set my laptop on a wobbly card table I had found on the curb, I felt a strange sense of ownership. This space was ugly, it was cold, and it smelled faintly of boiled cabbage from the neighbor downstairs. But it was mine. No one could kick me out of here as long as I paid the $800 a month in rent. I had exactly $4,000 left to my name after selling everything that wasn't essential for survival. Most people in my position would have hoarded that cash, terrified of the next fall. But I was done with fear. I was done with playing defense. I took $3,500 of that safety net, nearly 90% of my total worth, and I invested it. I did not buy stocks. I did not buy clothes. I bought knowledge. I enrolled in an advanced, accelerated certification program for crisis management and digital forensics. It was an intense, 6-week course designed for high-level executives. But I devoured the material with the hunger of a starving wolf. I spent 18 hours a day glued to my screen, learning the architecture of online scandals. I learned how algorithms amplified outrage. I learned how bot farms could simulate a grassroots movement. I learned how to trace a rumor back to its patient zero. As I studied, I began to see the matrix ebb. I realized that the corporate world was terrified. Big companies, with their billions in revenue, were trembling before the power of the cancel culture mob. They were reactive. When a scandal hit, they panicked. They fired people. They issued bland, apologetic press releases written by lawyers who did not understand the internet. They tried to put out forest fires with squirt guns. They did not need PR spin. They needed data. They needed the truth. I finished the course in 4 weeks, finishing at the top of the class, and right there, on my wobbly card table, amidst the sound of passing trains, Veritas Analytics was born. It was not much to look at, just a website I coded myself and a registered LLC that cost me $200 to file. My slogan was simple: we do not spin, we solve. For the first 2 weeks, the phone did not ring. I sent out hundreds of cold emails to companies appearing in the news for minor scandals. I offered them a free preliminary analysis. Most ignored me. Some told me to get lost. But on a rainy Tuesday morning, a reply landed in my inbox. It was from a small chain of family-owned Italian restaurants called Nonno's Table. They were in the middle of a nightmare. A video had gone viral on TikTok, claiming that their flagship location was serving rat meat in their lasagna. The video had 4 million views. Their rating on Google had dropped from 4.8 stars to 1.2 stars in 48 hours. They were facing bankruptcy. The owner, a man named Marco, sounded desperate on the phone. "Everyone tells me to apologize," he said, his voice cracking. "My PR firm says I should issue a statement promising to do better, but we did not do it. Beatrice, it is a lie." Why should I apologize for a lie? "I will take the case." I said, "If I cannot prove it is a lie in 48 hours, you do not owe me a cent. If I do, you pay me $5,000. He agreed. I went to work. I did not look at the food. I looked at the data. I scraped the metadata from the original video. I analyzed the accounts that had shared it first. I looked for patterns in the timestamps of the negative reviews. It took me 36 hours of non-stop work. My eyes burned, and my back ached from the cheap plastic chair. But I found it. The video was a deepfake, and a sloppy one at that. But the real smoking gun was the network of accounts that had boosted it. They were not real customers. They were bot accounts, all created on the same day, all operating from a server farm in Eastern Europe. And when I followed the money trail of who had rented that server space, I found a shell company. I dug deeper, peeling back the layers of corporate obfuscation until I found a name. It was a rival restaurant group that had just opened a location across the street from Nonno's Table. I compiled a 20-page report. It was cold, precise, and irrefutable. I did not just give Marco an opinion. I gave him a weapon. Marco took my report to the press. He took it to the police. The story shifted overnight. The narrative went from gross restaurant serves rats to beloved local family business attacked by corporate sabotage. The public outrage U-turned instantly. People flocked to Nonno's Table to support them. The rival restaurant was raided by the authorities for unfair trade practices. When the check for $5,000 hit my bank account, I did not celebrate with champagne. I paid my rent for the next 6 months. Then I bought a better chair. That was the beginning. Word traveled fast in the desperate circles of crisis management. Marco told his suppliers, His suppliers told their distributors. Suddenly, I was not the one sending cold emails. My inbox began to fill up with inquiries. Veritas Analytics became known as the cleaner. I was the person you called when you were innocent and needed to prove it, or when you were guilty and needed to know exactly how bad the damage was before you spoke. My style was distinct. I did not offer tea and sympathy. I walked into meetings wearing sharp, charcoal gray suits I had thrifted and tailored to perfection. I did not smile to make people comfortable. I laid charts on the table. I spoke in percentages and probabilities. I remember a meeting with a tech CEO who was being accused of harassment. He tried to charm me, tried to use his charisma to get me to soften the report. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Sir, the data shows that 82% of the negative sentiment is coming from your own employees on anonymous forums. You do not have a PR problem. You have a leadership problem. I am here to fix the leak, not to tell you that you are a nice guy." He fired me on the spot. 2 days later, his stock tanked 40%. He hired me back at double my rate the following Monday. I was hardening. The Beatrice who had cried because her husband didn't like her dress was gone. In her place was a woman who viewed emotion as a variable that needed to be controlled. I was building armor out of success, and while I was climbing out of the mud, Julian and Alara were soaring in the clouds. I could not avoid them entirely. They were everywhere. The Meridian merger had gone through despite the risks, and Sterling Vance was the darling of Wall Street. Julian was named the youngest director in the company's history. I was sitting in a waiting room for a dentist appointment when I saw the segment on the television mounted on the wall. It was an entertainment news program, The Golden Couple of Chicago. The headline screamed in gold letters. There they were, Julian and Alara, announcing their engagement. The footage showed a party that must have cost more than I would earn in a decade. Alara was flashing a diamond ring the size of a quail egg, hanging onto Julian's arm like a trophy. Julian was smiling, waving to the cameras. Looking every inch the master of the universe, I watched them, waiting for the familiar stab of pain. I waited for the jealousy, the anger, the sense of loss, but it did not come. Instead, I felt a strange, detached pity. I looked at Julian's eyes on the screen. He was smiling. Yes, but the lines around his mouth were tight. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who was performing, a man who was constantly terrified of missing a cue. And Alara, she looked manic. Her eyes darted around the crowd, seeking validation, feeding on the attention like a vampire feeds on blood. They looked shiny, but they looked hollow. They were building a life on a foundation of lies and insider trading, and they were too arrogant to realize that the ground beneath them was swampland. "You can have him." "Alara," I thought, taking a sip of the stale waiting room water, "you can have the stress. You can have the pretense. You can have the man who treats people like stepping stones. Because sooner or later, he will step on you too." I was free. I was making my own money. I was building a reputation that belonged to me, not a husband, not a father. I was Beatrice Halston, the owner of Veritas Analytics. And I did not answer to anyone. 6 months into my new life, the biggest turning point arrived. It came in the form of a heavy, cream-colored envelope delivered by a private courier to my tiny apartment. I was surprised the courier even found the place. He looked nervous standing in the hallway that smelled of cabbage. I opened the letter. The letterhead was embossed with a silver logo I recognized immediately. Blackwood Associates. They were the arch-rivals of Sterling Vance. If Sterling Vance was the old money, the establishment, the country club set, then Blackwood was the Shark Tank. They were aggressive, modern, and ruthless. They had been trying to dethrone Sterling Vance for 20 years. The letter was short. "Dear Ms. Halston, we have been watching the rise of Veritas Analytics with great interest. Your work on the Hearthstone Bistro case and the TechLink crisis was masterful. You have a talent for weaponizing truth that is rare in this industry. We have a situation that requires your particular set of skills. It involves a competitor. We believe our interests may align. We would like to retain your services exclusively for a specific project. The retainer fee is $50,000 a month. Please call the number below if you are interested in changing the landscape of Chicago finance. Sincerely, Marcus Blackwood, CEO. I lowered the letter, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. A competitor. $50,000 a month. That was more money than I used to make in a year. But it was not the money that made me smile. It was the implication. Blackwood wanted to hire me to look into a competitor. And there was only one competitor that Blackwood obsessed over. Sterling Vance. Julian had told me that if I fought him, he would ruin me. He thought I would fight him with tears and emotional pleas. He never imagined that I would fight him with a corporate retainer and a team of forensic accountants backing me up. I walked over to my wobbly card table. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number on the stationery. When the receptionist answered, my voice was steady, cold, and professional. "This is Beatrice Halston," I said. "Tell Mr. Blackwood I am accepting his offer. Tell him I know exactly where to look." Time is a sculptor, and over the last 2 years, it had chipped away the soft, pliable parts of Beatrice Halston, leaving behind something harder, sharper, and infinitely more durable. The woman who had stood in a drafty apartment crying over a red sports car was dead. In her place stood the CEO of Veritas Analytics, a woman who walked into the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton not to serve drinks or take notes, but to dictate terms. The Midwest Economic Summit was the kind of event where the air conditioning was set to Arctic temperatures to keep the $5,000 suits from sweating. It was a sea of navy blue and charcoal gray, a gathering of the city's financial predators circling each other in search of weakness. 2 years ago, I would have felt suffocated here. I would have tugged at my hem, worried about saying the wrong thing, terrified of not fitting in. Today, I moved through the crowd with the ease of a shark in open water. I was wearing a bespoke suit, tailored in Milan during a business trip last month. It was midnight blue, with a sharp lapel that cut across my chest like a blade. My heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. I was not here to spectate. I was here representing a major pharmaceutical client who was navigating a tricky recall. And for the last hour, I had been fielding questions from investors with a calm precision that left them nodding in submission. I knew they would be here. It was inevitable. Sterling Vance was one of the primary sponsors of the summit. Their logo was plastered on every banner, looming over the attendees like a watchful eye. But knowing they were in the building and seeing them were two very different things. I spotted Julian first. He was standing near the champagne tower, surrounded by a group of junior executives who were hanging on his every word. He looked the part of the successful director. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his suit was impeccably cut, and he held his drink with the practiced ease of a man born to wealth. But I was in the business of seeing what people tried to hide. And I saw the cracks. There was a tension in his shoulders that the tailoring could not disguise. His eyes darted around the room restlessly, never settling on one thing for too long, as if he were constantly scanning for a threat. He looked older. The boyish charm that I had fallen in love with in the library 7 years ago had been eroded, replaced by a hardened, cynical edge. He looked like a man who was playing a role he had grown tired of, but could not exit. I did not hide. I did not turn away. I continued my conversation with my client, laughing softly at a joke, allowing my profile to catch the light. I felt his gaze hit me a moment later. It was a physical sensation, like a change in air pressure. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, and locked eyes with him across the room. The shock on his face was satisfyingly raw. He blinked, his mouth opening slightly before he caught himself. He took a step forward, then hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind. He excused himself from his group and began to weave through the crowd toward me. I finished my conversation with my client, promised to follow up on the data sets in the morning, and turned to face my ex-husband. "Beatrice." His voice was tentative, laced with disbelief. He stopped 2 feet away from me, respecting a boundary he seemed to sense I had erected. He looked me up and down, taking in the suit, the jewelry understated but real gold, and the way I held myself. This was not the woman he had discarded. This was a stranger. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was cool, smooth, devoid of any jagged edges. "It has been a long time." He let out a short, incredulous breath. "You look incredible. I almost did not recognize you. I heard rumors, of course. People saying there was a Halston running a boutique crisis firm, but I assumed it was a coincidence. I did not think you had it in you. It was a backhanded compliment, the kind he used to give me when we were married. I didn't think you were smart enough. I didn't think you were strong enough. People change. Julian," I replied, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "Necessity is a powerful motivator." He swirled his drink, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to assess the situation. He was looking for the cracks in my armor, looking for the wounded wife who would scream or cry. He did not know how to handle a peer. "So, Veritas Analytics," he said, testing the name. "I heard you handled the Blackwood situation. That was messy. You are playing in the big leagues now." "I am simply cleaning up the messes that men like you make," I said, keeping my tone light, almost conversational. "It pays surprisingly well." He flinched. The jab landed, but before he could respond, a shadow fell over us. The scent of jasmine and expensive vanilla arrived before she did. Well, look who decided to crawl out of the woodwork. Alara Vance materialized at Julian's elbow. She slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. Not with affection, but with possessiveness. She was wearing a red dress that was too loud for a business conference, a desperate scream for attention in a room full of serious people. She looked beautiful, undeniably, but there was a brittleness to her beauty now. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too bright. She looked like a woman who was constantly defending her territory. She looked at me with a sneer that she didn't bother to hide. "Beatrice," she drawled, dragging out the syllables of my name. "I saw you over here. I must say, that suit is a vast improvement over those polyester rags you used to wear. Did you find a rich client to sponsor your little hobby?" I looked at her. 2 years ago. Her words would have cut me to the bone. I would have felt shame. I would have wanted to shrink until I disappeared. But now I looked at her, and I saw data points. I saw a woman who was insecure, volatile, and dangerously arrogant. I saw a target. "Hello, Alara," I said, smiling. It is a genuine smile, one that did not reach my eyes. No sponsors, just hard work. My little hobby, as you call it, actually posted a higher profit margin last quarter than your marketing division, but who is counting? Alara's smile faltered. Her grip on Julian's arm tightened until her knuckles turned white. Julian looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Cute," Alara spat. "But let us be real. You are a scavenger. You pick through the trash that real companies leave behind. Sterling Vance is closing deals that would make your head spin. We are building the future. You are just sweeping the floor." She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that drew glances from the nearby tables. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me back in my place. I took a step closer to her. I did not raise my voice. In fact, I lowered it, forcing her to lean in to hear me. "You know, Alara," I said softly, "I actually have to thank you." She blinked, confused. "Excuse me, I mean it," I continued, my eyes locking onto hers. 2 years ago, I was naive. I thought the world was fair. I thought privacy was a given, but you taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. You taught me that information is only safe if you control the flow. You taught me that a single digital footprint, a single reckless comment, can destroy an empire. I let the words hang there. I saw the recognition flicker in her eyes. I saw the memory of that deleted post, the insider trading, the arrogance, flash behind her pupils. "Because of you," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "I learned the value of data privacy. And I learned exactly where to look when people forget to protect theirs." The color drained from Alara's face. It was subtle, masked by her heavy foundation. But I saw it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogance evaporated for a split second, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated fear. She did not know what I had. She did not know if I had kept the screenshots. She had convinced herself that I was too weak to do anything, that the threat had passed. But looking at me now, standing in this ballroom in a suit that cost more than her first car, she realized she had made a miscalculation. Julian looked between us, sensing the shift in power but not understanding the source. "What are you talking about?" "What comment?" Alara snapped at him, her voice shrill. "Shut up, Julian. She's just trying to get in your head. Come on, we have to meet the Vice President of Operations." She tugged on his arm, hard. It was not a request. It was a command. I watched the dynamic play out in real time. Julian, the man who had left me because he wanted to be a king, was nothing more than a corgi on a diamond-studded leash. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and a strange, lingering regret. He looked like he wanted to stay, wanted to ask me more, wanted to escape the claw-like grip on his bicep, but he didn't. He let her pull him away. I stood there, watching them retreat. Alara was whispering furiously to him, her gestures sharp and angry. Julian's shoulders were slumped. This was the upgrade he had destroyed our life for. A life of being managed, controlled, and humiliated by a woman who viewed him as an accessory to her own vanity. I finished my sparkling water and placed the glass on a passing waiter's tray. The encounter had not drained me. It had energized me. I had looked the monster in the eye and found it small. They were walking away, thinking the uncomfortable moment was over. They thought they had escaped with just a bruise to their ego. They had no idea that the ground beneath them was already rigged with explosives. I checked my watch. The Blackwood team was expecting my final report in 3 days. The timing was poetic. The Sterling Vance IPO anniversary was next week. They were planning a massive gala to celebrate their success. Perfect. I turned and walked toward the exit, the sound of my heels firm and steady on the marble. I did not look back at them. I did not need to. I knew exactly where they were going, and I knew exactly when they would fall. The game was over. They just didn't know the score yet. The countdown clock on the Bloomberg terminal in my office was ticking down to 0. It was labeled Project Horizon, the code name for the initial public offering of Sterling Future, a tech subsidiary that was entirely Julian's creation. This was his magnum opus. For the last 6 months, the financial press had been fawning over him, calling him the visionary who was dragging the old money Sterling empire into the 21st century. If this IPO launched successfully on Friday, Julian would secure his legacy. He would be untouchable. The valuation was projected to open at $40 a share, which would inject billions of dollars into the company and tens of millions into Julian's personal bank account. I sat in the dark of my office at Veritas Analytics, the only light coming from the 3 monitors arranged in a semicircle around me to the outside world. Julian was a golden boy, but I was looking at the cracks in the gold. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, enforces a strict rule known as the quiet period. During the weeks leading up to an IPO, company executives and insiders are legally forbidden from making any promotional statements that could artificially inflate the stock price. It is a time for silence. It is a time for discipline. But discipline is a foreign concept to a narcissist. I had set up a specialized algorithm to scrape social media for any keywords related to Sterling Future, Julian Thorne, or Alara Vance, for weeks. Alara had been relatively well-behaved. Her publicists had likely terrified her into silence. Her Instagram feed had been a benign stream of landscape photos and vague inspirational quotes. But a tiger cannot change its stripes, and Alara Vance could not suppress her need for adoration. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days before the IPO, my alert system pinged. Alara had posted a story on Instagram. It was gone in 10 minutes deleted, presumably by a panicked handler, but my system captured it in the first 3 seconds. It was a video. She was sitting in the back of a limousine, clearly intoxicated, holding a glass of champagne. She looked into the camera, winking. "The quiet period is so boring," she whispered, slurring her words slightly. "But just wait until Friday. We are going to break records. The pre-sale numbers are insane. My daddy says the stock is undervalued even at 40. We are going to the moon. Babies, buy in early or cry later." I watched the video 3 times. My face remained expressionless, but my mind was racing. Connecting the dots with the speed of a supercomputer, on the surface, this was a violation of the quiet period. It was gun jumping. If the SEC saw this, they would delay the IPO, they would fine the company, it would be a headache. But I knew it was worse than that. Much worse. I opened my encrypted drive, the digital graveyard where I kept the screenshots from 2 years ago. I pulled up the image of Alara's pinned comment, the one where she bragged about the Meridian merger before it was public. I placed the 2 pieces of evidence side by side on my center monitor. 2 years ago, Alara leaked the Meridian merger. Today, Alara leaked the pre-sale numbers for Sterling Future. I began to dig into the S1, filing the massive legal document Sterling Vance had submitted to the SEC to register for the IPO. I looked at the valuation history of the subsidiary. I cross-referenced the dates of the Meridian merger with the asset transfer that formed Sterling Future, and then I saw it. The anomaly. The valuation of Sterling Future was heavily dependent on the assets acquired during the Meridian merger. The financial reports claimed that the merger was executed at fair market value, but looking at the trading volume from 2 years ago, the spike that happened right after Alara's tweet, I realized that the stock price of Meridian had been artificially inflated by the leak. Sterling Vance had paid an inflated price for Meridian assets to cover up the insider trading spike. They had buried the cost in a complex web of consulting fees and restructuring costs. And who had signed off on those restructuring costs? I pulled up the signature page of the quarterly report from 2 years ago. Julian Thorne, Director of Strategy. My breath hitched. Julian had not just benefited from the leak. He had actively covered it up. He had used company funds to overpay for an asset to hide the fact that his mistress had committed a federal crime. And now, they were using those same tainted assets as the foundation for this new IPO. This was not just gun jumping, this was securities fraud. This was a conspiracy to defraud shareholders. This was a 10-year prison sentence wrapped in an Armani suit. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The puzzle was complete. I held the power to nuke the entire IPO. I could send this to the Wall Street Journal. I could send it to the New York Times. The story would be sensational. Socialite's Instagram addiction reveals billion-dollar fraud. But the press is chaotic. The press allows for spin. Julian would go on television, look sad, and blame it all on Alara. He would claim he was a victim of a loose cannon. He might even survive it. No, I did not want a scandal. I wanted an execution. I needed to target the only people Julian feared more than the SEC. I needed to target the money. I opened a new document. I did not write a letter. I wrote a risk assessment dossier. The header was simple, confidential report, compliance violations and financial liability regarding Project Horizon. I wrote in the language of the boardroom. I did not use emotional words. I used legal statutes. Section 1. Evidence of gun jumping. I attached the video Alara had posted 3 hours ago. I cited the specific SEC regulations that prohibited referencing pre-sale numbers. Section 2. Historical pattern of non-compliance. I attached the screenshots from 2 years ago. I laid out the timeline of the Meridian leak. Section 3. The financial link. This was the kill shot. I demonstrated, using their own public filings, how Julian had manipulated the acquisition costs to cover the insider trading spike caused by Alara. I calculated the potential fines. I calculated the probability of a Department of Justice investigation. Conclusion: if this information becomes public through a third party, Sterling Vance faces a minimum stock devaluation of 60%, a suspension of the IPO, and criminal indictments for the executive team. The company has 48 hours to rectify the leadership structure before external auditors identify these discrepancies. I did not sign my name. I did not put the Veritas Analytics logo on the header. This was not about credit. I navigated to the encrypted email server I used for sensitive communications. I typed in the email addresses. I did not include Julian. I did not include Alara. I addressed it to the board of directors of Sterling Vance. I addressed it to the chairman of the audit committee. I addressed it to the chief compliance officer. And finally, I addressed it to the external legal counsel handling the IPO. These were men and women who did not care about love or loyalty. They cared about their fiduciary duty. They cared about not going to jail. If they saw this evidence, they would not see a family squabble. They would see a radioactive isotope sitting in the CEO's chair. I hovered my mouse over the send button. If I sent this, there was no going back. I was pulling the thread that would unravel the sweater Julian had spent 7 years knitting. He would lose his job. He would lose his reputation. He might lose his freedom. I thought about the night he left me. I thought about the cold apartment. I thought about the $400 I got for my grandmother's necklace. I thought about his voice on the phone, threatening to ruin me if I spoke. He had built his castle on a swamp of lies, and he had invited a dragon to live in it. All I was doing was pointing out the methane gas. I clicked send. The screen refreshed. Message sent. I sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the servers. It was done. The bomb was in the building. It was silent, invisible, and ticking. I checked the time. It was 4 a.m. The board of directors would be waking up in 2 hours. They would check their secure emails over coffee. They would open the attachment. And then, the panic would set in. They would not call the police. They would not call the press. They would call an emergency meeting. They would turn on each other. They would look at Julian, the golden boy, and they would see a liability. I stood up and walked to the window of my office. Chicago was waking up. The first gray light of dawn was touching the tops of the skyscrapers. Far in the distance, I could see the Sterling Vance Tower. Standing tall and proud against the skyline, it looked sturdy. It looked permanent. But I knew better. I picked up my bag and turned off the lights. I was going to go home, take a long shower, and make myself a warm breakfast. I had a busy day ahead of me. After all, when a giant falls, it makes a lot of dust, and someone has to be ready to clear the air. As I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news app. Sterling Future IPO. Anticipation reaches fever pitch. I smiled. Enjoy the hype while it lasts. Julian, because the market is about to correct itself. The sun had not yet risen over Lake Michigan when the first domino fell, but the sound of its impact echoed through the financial district with the force of a thunderclap. I was sitting in my kitchen, a mug of Earl Grey tea steaming in my hands, watching the pre-market trading ticker on my tablet. The city outside was quiet, draped in the blue-gray hues of early dawn. But inside the glass-walled boardroom on the 45th floor of the Sterling Vance Tower, the world was ending. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly what was happening. I knew the players. I knew the stakes. And thanks to a frantic text message I had just received from Marcus Blackwood, who had his own spies embedded deep within the Sterling infrastructure, I had a play-by-play of the carnage I had unleashed. The emergency meeting had been called at 3 a.m. Julian had arrived thinking it was a final strategy session for the Project Horizon IPO. He had probably walked in wearing his best suit, expecting coffee and congratulations. Instead, he walked into a firing squad, according to the intel. The boardroom was freezing cold. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the 12 members of the board of directors, men and women who controlled billions of dollars in assets. They were not drinking coffee. They were staring at a screen that had been lowered at the head of the room. On that screen, projected in high definition, was the digital history of Alara Vance. It was not the curated, airbrushed version she showed the world. It was the raw, ugly truth I had preserved. The slide changed. A screenshot from 2 years ago appeared. It was Alara's comment reply to a fan, the one I had saved before she could scrub it. We have been manipulating the price since last month. The peasants have no idea what is coming. A gasp had reportedly gone around the room. This was not just a social media gaffe. This was a confession. This was a written admission of market manipulation. a direct violation of the Securities Exchange Act, time-stamped and verified. Then, the next slide, the video from 3 hours ago, Alara, drunk in a limousine, slurring her words about the pre-sale numbers, explicitly violating the quiet period. My daddy says the stock is undervalued. Buy in early or cry later. The chairman of the board, a man known for his icy temperament, slammed his hand on the table. He did not look at Julian with the pride of a mentor. He looked at him with the revulsion one reserves for a diseased limb that needs to be amputated. "You allowed this," the chairman roared, his voice shaking the walls. "You allowed your wife to treat federal securities laws like suggestions Julian tried to speak." I could imagine him sweating, his charm failing him for the first time in his life. He would have stammered. He would have tried to shift the blame. She did not mean it. He would have said, "It was just a joke. I can control her. Control her." The chief legal officer threw a stack of papers onto the table, my dossier. "We are facing a Department of Justice investigation. Julian, we are looking at fines that could wipe out our quarterly profits. We are looking at jail time." The room erupted into chaos. Phones were ringing. Lawyers were shouting over each other. The IPO, the golden goose that was supposed to make them all rich on Friday, was dead on the table. And then, the leak happened. It is impossible to keep a secret when 12 angry people are in a room, terrified of losing their money. One of the board members, desperate to distance himself from the sinking ship, sent a message to a contact at CNBC at 6:30 in the morning. The news broke. I watched it happen in real time on my television. The anchor, usually composed, looked flustered as she touched her earpiece. "Breaking news coming out of the financial district," she said. "We are receiving reports that the highly anticipated Sterling Future IPO has been suspended indefinitely following allegations of severe compliance violations and insider trading involving senior leadership." The ticker at the bottom of the screen turned red. Sterling Vance S5E. Pre-market trading halted, down 12%, 12%. In 10 minutes. It was a bloodbath. But the real storm, the one I had been waiting for, was not on the stock market. It was on the internet. The news of the suspension hit Twitter like a match thrown into a pool of gasoline. Financial analysts started digging. They found the rumors of the leaked video. They found the screenshots I had anonymously seeded into a few key forums just moments after sending the email to the board. And then, the internet did what it does best. It remembered. A financial blogger with 500,000 followers retweeted the screenshot of Alara's old comment, the one where she called me a crutch and a burden. He placed it next to a photo of me from last week's economic summit, looking powerful and poised in my midnight blue suit. The caption read, 2 years ago, Julian Thorne left his wife to upgrade to the heiress of Sterling Vance. Today, the heiress got his IPO canceled and his stock tanked. While the ex-wife is running the top crisis management firm in Chicago, talk about a bad trade, it went viral instantly. The hashtag #KarmaForBeatrice started trending within the hour. It jumped from the financial Twitter circles to the mainstream. People who did not know a stock option from a bond were suddenly invested in the drama. They saw the classic narrative the hardworking wife discarded for the shiny new model, only for the new model to be defective. I refreshed my feed. The comments were pouring in faster than I could read them. User 1. He fumbled the bag so hard. Beatrice is a queen. User 2. Imagine leaving a genius data analyst for a girl who commits federal crimes on Instagram Live. Embarrassing. User 3. This is not just a divorce. This is a Greek tragedy. Team Beatrice. My phone began to buzz. It was not Julian this time. It was the media. Requests for interviews. Good Morning America. The Today Show. The New York Times. They all wanted a comment from the woman who won. I ignored them all. Silence was still my loudest weapon. Back at the Sterling Vance Tower, the chaos had moved from the boardroom to the executive suites. Julian was escorted out of his office by 2 security guards. He was not allowed to pack his things. He was not allowed to access his computer. His company phone was confiscated. He walked past the rows of cubicles where employees he had once looked down upon were now staring at him with a mixture of shock and schadenfreude. The official press release went out at 9 o'clock. Sterling Vance announces the immediate suspension of Director Julian Thorne pending an internal investigation into compliance irregularities. Suspension. In corporate language, that is a polite way of saying you are dead to us. But while Julian was being marched out in silence, Alara was doing the one thing she should have avoided at all costs. She was fighting back, trapped in her penthouse, watching her name get dragged through the mud, seeing her follower count drop by the thousands. Alara Vance panicked. She was a creature of validation. She could not handle the hate. She needed to prove that she was still the queen. She went on Twitter. It was a fatal error. A crisis manager would have tackled her and thrown the phone out the window. But Alara was alone. Julian was in transit, likely screaming into a void, and her father was too busy trying to save his company to babysit her. She typed out a tweet. "You people are pathetic. You believe everything you read. My father owns this city. You are just jealous because you will never see the inside of a private jet. Keep crying. Peasants, we are still rich." I saw the tweet pop up on my screen and I almost laughed out loud. It was perfect. It was the final nail in the coffin. She had just insulted the public, the shareholders, and the very customers her father's company relied on. She had used the word peasants. The internet did not just get angry, it got mobilized. Within 10 minutes, the screenshot of her tweet was everywhere. It was on the news. It was on Reddit. It was being read aloud on radio stations. The backlash was nuclear. A viral movement began to boycott Sterling Vance properties. People were posting videos of themselves cutting up their Sterling Vance credit cards. Real estate agents were pulling listings from their brokerage. Alara had tried to put out the fire with gasoline. Then, she doubled down. She started replying to individual comments, her tone becoming more hysterical and unhinged with every post. User: "You just cost your dad billions. Alara, you are broke. You do not understand high finance. It is a strategy user Julian must be regretting everything right now. Alara Julian worships the ground I walk on. He knows I am the prize." It was painful to watch. It was a public meltdown of epic proportions. She was destroying the last shred of credibility her family had. She was proving every single negative thing I had ever suspected about her. She was not a partner. She was a liability wrapped in silk. At 10:30, my phone rang again. It was Marcus Blackwood. "Beatrice," he said, his voice thick with amusement. "Are you watching this?" "I am," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "I have never seen anything like it." He chuckled. "The stock is down 25%. The board is meeting again. They are discussing removing Alara's father as CEO if he cannot control his daughter. You did not just kill the IPO. Beatrice, you decapitated the dynasty." I looked at the screen, where a new video was playing. It was Julian, caught by paparazzi as he exited the Sterling Vance building. He looked shattered. His tie was crooked. His face was pale. He ignored the questions screamed at him, shoving his way into a waiting car. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a dream to find himself in a burning house. And Alara. Her Twitter account suddenly vanished. This account does not exist. Someone, probably a lawyer who had physically wrestled the phone away from her, had finally pulled the plug. But it was too late. The screenshots were immortal. The damage was done. I stood up and walked to my balcony. The air was cold, biting, but it felt fresh. 2 years ago, they had broken me. They had laughed at my pain. They had called me a stepping stone. Today, the stepping stone was the only thing left standing, while the castle they built on top of it crumbled into dust. I went back inside and picked up my phone. I finally decided to make a statement, not to the press, not to the public, but to my team at Veritas Analytics. I typed a message into our internal Slack channel. "Team, expect a high volume of inquiries today. The market is volatile, and companies are going to be terrified of social media liability. We are raising our rates by 30% effective immediately. Let us get to work." I hit enter. The chaos was swirling outside, A hurricane of ruined reputations and lost fortunes. But in my office, it was quiet. It was the silence of a job well done. I had not screamed. I had not fought. I had simply turned on the lights, and the cockroaches had scattered. The call came at 2 p.m, cutting through the hum of activity in my office like a siren. My assistant, a bright young woman named Sarah, who had no idea of my history with the names on her screen, buzzed me with a tone of hushed reverence. "Ms. Halston," she said, "I have the office of Richard Vance on line 1. He says it is urgent." I paused, my hand hovering over the mouse. Richard Vance, the CEO of Sterling Vance, the man who sat at the head of the table during the holidays, drinking aged scotch while I cleared the dishes, the man who had once looked through me as if I were made of glass. "Put him through," I said, my voice steady. "Beatrice." His voice was a gravelly rumble, stripped of its usual polished authority. He sounded old. He sounded tired. "We have a situation." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline. "I know. Richard, it is all over the news. Your stock is down 30%. Your IPO is dead. Your reputation is bleeding out on the pavement." "I did not call for a recap," he snapped, though there was no bite in it. "I called because the board is demanding an independent external audit and a crisis containment strategy. They want the best. Blackwood recommends you." The irony was so rich I could taste it. The man whose daughter had ruined my life was now begging me to save his. "I am expensive, Richard," I said, "and I do not work with amateurs. I will pay whatever you want," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Just get down here, now." 45 minutes later, I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Sterling Vance Tower. 2 years ago, I had walked in here to bring Julian his forgotten lunch, wearing a coat from a discount rack, feeling small and insignificant. Today, I walked in flanked by 2 of my senior analysts. I was wearing a white suit, sharp, clinical, and immaculate. The security guards did not ask for my ID. They stepped aside as if I were royalty. The elevator ride to the penthouse floor was silent. When the doors opened, the chaos hit me. The reception area was filled with shouting lawyers, weeping assistants, and the smell of stale coffee and fear. We were ushered into the main boardroom immediately. The room was heavy with tension. Richard Vance sat at the head of the table, his face gray, his tie loosened. To his right sat the source of the rot, Julian and Alara. They looked like wreckage. Julian was slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. His suit was rumpled, his hair messy. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. Alara was sitting upright, but her eyes were red and swollen. She was clutching a sparkling water bottle so hard the plastic was crinkling. When she saw me walk in, her head snapped up. Her expression shifted from misery to a look of pure, venomous hatred. "You," she hissed. I ignored her. I walked to the other end of the table, placed my leather portfolio on the mahogany surface, and remained standing. I looked directly at Richard. "You asked for a strategy," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "Here is the reality. You are not facing a PR problem. You are facing an existential threat. The market has lost faith in your leadership. The SEC is sharpening its knives. You have lost $4 billion in valuation in 6 hours. Richard rubbed his temples. "I know the numbers. Beatrice, how do we fix it?" "We stop the bleeding," I said. "We issue a statement within the hour, announcing a complete cooperation with federal regulators. We announce an independent audit of all communication channels. And most importantly, we announce a restructuring of the leadership team to restore shareholder confidence." Alara let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She slammed her hand on the table. "Oh, please," she screamed, standing up. "Stop acting like you are some corporate savior. We all know what this is." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You did this," she spat. "You orchestrated this whole thing. The leaks, the bots, the rumors. You did it all because you are still obsessed with my husband. You want to ruin us so you can crawl back into his life. This is not business. This is a jealous ex-wife throwing a tantrum. The room went deadly silent. Julian looked up, his eyes wide, a flicker of hope in them, as if he wanted to believe her, as if he wanted to believe that I still cared enough to hate him. I looked at Alara. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I looked at her with the cold detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. You flatter yourself. Alara, I said softly. I opened my portfolio. If I wanted Julian back, I would have taken him, but I do not collect trash. Alara gasped, her face turning a mottled red. I am here because your father hired me. I continued, turning back to Richard. And my condition for accepting this contract is simple. Veritas Analytics cannot repair the reputation of this company as long as the individuals responsible for the crisis remain employed. Richard looked up, his eyes narrowing. What are you saying I am saying? I replied, sliding a contract across the table, that I will only sign this if you terminate the employment of the Director of Strategy and the Director of Marketing, effective immediately, for cause. You can't, Alara shrieked. I am his daughter, Daddy. Tell her she is crazy. You cannot fire me. Richard looked at his daughter. Then he looked at the plummeting stock ticker on the wall screen. I opened a folder in my portfolio. I figured you might hesitate. Richard, I said, nepotism is a powerful drug, but before you decide to protect your family over your shareholders, you should see this. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was an email printout. During my preliminary sweep of your internal servers this morning, which you authorized when you gave me access, I found an email sent from Alara's corporate account to Julian's account. Dated 3 days ago, I held it up. Alara froze. Her face went white. Read it, I said, sliding it toward Richard. Richard picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He adjusted his glasses and read the highlighted text. Subject re-shareholder concerns. From Alara Vance to Julian Thorne. Who cares what the board thinks? They are just a bunch of geriatric morons. And the shareholders, they are sheep. We will feed them whatever numbers we want, and those idiots will eat it up. We run this place. They just pay for our vacations. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a bomb blast. Calling your investors sheep and idiots on a company server. I said, my voice cool and even. That is not just unprofessional. Richard, that is a breach of fiduciary duty. If that email leaks during the discovery phase of the SEC investigation, and it will, you will not just lose money. You will be removed by the board. You might even face charges for enabling a hostile work environment and defrauding investors. Richard lowered the paper slowly. He looked at the email, then he looked at his daughter. The look in his eyes was not the look of a father. It was the look of a CEO who had just found a cancer cell. Alara, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You wrote this, Alara stammered. Stepping back, Daddy, I was just venting. It was a private email. It does not mean anything. You called our biggest investors morons, Richard roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the water pitcher rattled. Do you have any idea what you have done? You have handed them the gun to shoot us with, but, Alara looked around the room. Frantic, she looked at Julian. Do something. Say something. Julian sat there, paralyzed. He looked at the email on the table, then at his father-in-law's purple face. He realized the ship was sinking, and he tried, in one last desperate act of cowardice, to jump off. I did not write it, Julian said, his voice trembling. Richard, look at the sender. It was her. I told her to stop. I told her it was dangerous. I was trying to contain her. Alara turned to him, her mouth falling open. You coward, she whispered. You spineless coward. You laughed when I sent that. You replied with a smiley face. Enough, Richard shouted. He pressed the intercom button on the table. Security, get in here, now. The doors burst open. 4 large security guards stepped in. Richard stood up. He pointed a shaking finger at his daughter and his son-in-law. Escort, Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Vance out of the building. He ordered, confiscate their badges, wipe their phones. They are no longer employees of Sterling Vance. Alara screamed. No, you cannot do this. I am an heiress. This is my company. She lunged toward her father, grabbing his arm. Daddy? Please do not let that witch win. She planned this. Get her off me, Richard yelled, pulling his arm away with a look of disgust. You are fired. Alara, you are done. Two guards grabbed Alara by the arms. She kicked and screamed, her heels scraping against the expensive carpet, her voice shrill and breaking. Julian did not scream. He stood up slowly, his face the color of ash. He looked at Richard, but the CEO turned his back on him. The guards moved toward him. Wait, Julian said. He looked around the room, his eyes wild with panic. He realized he had no allies. He had no money. He had no job. And then, his eyes landed on me. I was standing calmly by the table, watching the scene unfold with my hands clasped in front of me. Beatrice, he pleaded. His voice was broken, pathetic. B, please, you cannot let them do this. I have nowhere to go. I gave everything to this company. Help me, please, for the sake of what we had. The room seemed to slow down. I looked at the man who had once been my world. I looked at the eyes that had promised to love me forever, the lips that had told me I was just a stepping stone. He was on his knees, metaphorically and nearly literally, begging the woman he had discarded to save him from the woman he had chosen. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the indifference of a data point that has been resolved. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I leaned in slightly, so only he could hear me clearly over Alara's screams. You said I was a stepping stone. Julian, I said softly. I paused, letting the words sink in. But you forgot that once you step off the stone, you have to stand on your own 2 feet. I straightened up and looked at the guards. Please remove him. He is disturbing the meeting. Julian's face crumpled. He reached out a hand toward me, but the guard grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. He was dragged toward the door, his feet stumbling, looking back at me with a look of absolute devastation. I watched them go. I watched Alara Vance, the queen of social media, being hauled out like an unruly patron at a dive bar. I watched Julian Thorne, the golden boy, being discarded like a broken toy. The heavy double doors slammed shut, silencing their cries. The room was quiet. The air conditioning hummed. Richard Vance sank back into his chair. He looked 10 years older than he had when I walked in. He put his head in his hands for a moment, then looked up at me. His eyes were dead. Do you have the contract? He asked hoarsely. I slid the document across the polished table. It was already open to the signature page. Right here. Richard, I said. He took a pen from his pocket. He did not read the terms. He did not negotiate the fee. He signed his name with a heavy, defeated hand. He pushed the contract back to me. Fix this. Beatrice, he whispered. Just fix it. I picked up the contract. I checked the signature. It was valid. I closed my portfolio and snapped the lock shut. The sound was sharp, final, and satisfying. I will have my team here in an hour, I said professionally. We will start by scrubbing the servers and issuing the press release. You should go home. Richard, get some rest. It is going to be a long quarter. I turned and walked toward the door. I did not look back at the broken old man in the expensive chair. I walked out of the boardroom and down the long hallway. I passed the office that used to belong to Julian. The nameplate was still on the door, but soon it would be in the trash. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, catching my reflection in the polished metal, I saw myself. I saw the white suit. I saw the calm eyes. I saw the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes. I walked out of the Sterling Vance Tower and into the bright afternoon sun of Chicago. The air was crisp. The city was alive. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my bank. The retainer fee had just been wired. $50,000. I smiled. It was not about the money. It never was. But as I hailed a taxi, raising my hand with a confidence that stopped traffic, I had to admit the money was a nice bonus. I had won, not by screaming, not by crying, but by letting them speak. and then ensuring the whole world heard exactly what they said. Summer had finally arrived in Chicago, transforming the gray, biting landscape into a city of shimmering blue glass and emerald parks. The ice that had coated the windows of my old, drafty apartment was a distant memory, replaced by the warm, golden sunlight flooding into my corner office on the 32nd floor of the Willis Tower. The view from here was breathtaking. I could see the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, stretching out like a sheet of sapphire silk, dotted with white sailboats that looked like confetti from this height. The sign on the frosted glass door behind me read, Veritas Analytics in sharp, minimalist lettering. The company was no longer just a wobbly card table and a laptop. It was a team of 15 analysts, a dedicated legal department, and a client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. I swiveled my leather chair toward the window, taking a moment to breathe in the scent of fresh peonies sitting in a vase on my mahogany desk. It had been 6 months since the implosion of the Sterling Vance IPO. 6 months since the screaming match in the boardroom. 6 months since I walked out of that building with a check that cleared my debts and a reputation that launched my empire. On my computer screen, a news alert blinked. It was a retrospective piece from a local business journal, the kind of article written to fill space on a slow news day. The headline was sensational but predictable. The crash of the golden couple, where are they now? I hesitated for a fraction of a second, my finger hovering over the mouse. There was a time when seeing their names would have sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins, a mixture of pain and panic. But today, my heart rate did not change. My hands did not shake. I clicked the link with the casual curiosity of someone checking the weather forecast for a city they used to live in, but planned never to visit again. The article was thorough. It detailed the swift and brutal divorce proceedings that had finalized last month. Apparently, love does not conquer all when it is built on a foundation of narcissism and mutual blame. The moment the money stopped flowing and the prestige evaporated, Julian and Alara had turned on each other with the ferocity of starving rats. I scrolled down to the section about Julian. The photo showed him walking out of a courthouse, looking thinner, older, and remarkably ordinary. The caption noted that after being blacklisted from the financial sector for gross compliance negligence, Julian had struggled to find employment. He was currently working as a shift manager at a mid-range electronics store in a suburban mall. The article quoted an anonymous source saying that he spent his lunch break sitting alone in his car. Staring at his phone, I leaned back, studying his face in the grainy photo. This was the man who had told me I was a stepping stone. This was the man who had said he needed a partner with vision. Now, his vision was limited to inventory spreadsheets and customer complaints about broken toasters. He had wanted the world, but he had lacked the character to keep it. He was living in the wreckage of his own ambition, haunted by the ghost of the life he had thrown away. Then there was Alara. Her section was shorter. There were no recent photos, only an old stock image from her influencer days. The text explained that after her public meltdown and the subsequent firing, she had retreated entirely from the public eye. Her social media accounts were still deactivated. She was reportedly living in a guest house on her father's estate in Connecticut, surviving on a strict allowance, stripped of her board seat and her marketing title. She had become a pariah in the social circles she once ruled. The peasants she had mocked had moved on, finding new idols, leaving her to scream into a void that no longer cared to listen. I closed the tab. I expected to feel a surge of triumph. I expected to feel the urge to laugh, to call a friend and gloat, to toast to their misery, but I felt nothing. It was just information. It was just data. Their suffering did not make my coffee taste better. It did not make the sun shine brighter. They were simply variables that had been removed from the equation of my life, resulting in a cleaner, more efficient system. I realized then that this was the true victory. It was not seeing them fall. It was realizing that I no longer needed to look. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the polished wood. I picked it up, expecting a message from a client or my assistant. Instead, it was a text from Marcus. Not Marcus Blackwood, the intimidating CEO who had hired me to take down Sterling Vance. This was Marcus, the man I had gotten to know over the last few months of board meetings and strategy dinners. I have a table at Alinea for 8 o'clock. I would love to hear your thoughts on the volatility in the Asian markets, and perhaps, if we have time, I would like to tell you how impressive your analysis was on the tech merger yesterday. I stared at the screen, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. Marcus was brilliant. He was kind. He respected my mind. He did not look at me as a support system or a stepping stone. He looked at me as an equal. He did not need me to sacrifice my dreams to build his. He had his own empire, and he was intrigued by mine. I typed a reply. I will see you at 8, but be warned, I have strong opinions on the Asian markets. I set the phone down and stood up. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. Below me, the city of Chicago was teeming with life. Cars moved like corpuscles through the veins of the streets. People rushed to their destinations. The train tracks where I used to live rattled in the distance. I thought about the woman who had stood in that cold apartment 6 months ago, holding a divorce paper, feeling like her life was over. I thought about the woman who had pawned her grandmother's necklace to buy groceries. People often say that trauma makes you stronger. They say that we should be grateful for the people who hurt us because they forced us to grow. I reject that. I am not strong because Julian abandoned me. I am not successful because Alara mocked me. I am strong in spite of them. I am successful because when the snow was falling and the lights went out, I chose to light a candle instead of cursing the dark. I chose to work when I wanted to weep. I chose to believe in my own value when the world told me I was worthless. I do not owe Julian Thorne a single thing, not even my gratitude for his betrayal. I grabbed my blazer from the back of the chair and slipped it on. It was white, crisp, and tailored to perfection. I picked up my laptop bag. I took one last look at the empty office, the sanctuary I had built with my own 2 hands. The past was a lesson, but it was not a residence. Julian and Alara were stuck in a loop of regret and resentment. Trapped in the history they had written, I was walking forward. I turned off the lights. The office plunged into a soft, twilight shadow, illuminated only by the glow of the city outside. I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a steady, confident rhythm. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I discovered something else, something far more profound as I walked out the door and into the rest of my life. Success and happiness, achieved without ever speaking their names again, is the most exquisite meal of all. Thank you so much for listening to Beatrice's story of resilience and triumph. I hope her journey reminded you that no matter how hard the winter gets, you have the power to bring your own spring. Please leave a comment down below, telling me where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow from all corners of the world and hearing your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach and inspire even more people.